So you hear most of your stories about entrepreneurship failures in terms of someone who's this big giant star success story for entrepreneurship, and they talk about their past difficulties. You don't really hear a lot about failure from someone who's actually experiencing it in the trenches, and it feels like a very different beast when you're coming through it rather than looking back at it in retrospect. So we thought that we would share as an entrepreneur couple some of our failures. And to give context, we do have clients, we make money, we're still trying to grow our business, but like we haven't sold our business for millions of dollars or things like that. And so I think failure from the perspective of someone who is a still growing business will be helpful. And that's what we will get into. What are our failures? What did we learn from them? And maybe what are some mistakes that you can avoid? We will talk about in this video. I'm Alec from Easier Habits, and I coach overthinking entrepreneurs and how to turn their anxiety and overwhelm into unstoppable execution. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure, why not? My name is Meg Sorensen. I am a communication consultant and coach. I help people go global by using the English language in order to promote themselves, spread their culture, their business, and whatever else they want to get out into the world.
Awesome. So, failures, and if there's a particularly great failure, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. Support our failures. All right. So, where to start? I mean, one of the places I want to start with is just defining failure, as we were talking about earlier.
It's really important that you know what failure is so that you can understand everything in context.
I think it's great to recast failure and say that's a learning experience, but in this case, the learning experiences we are talking about are going to be the ones where things didn't work out as intended. And to some extent, one of my big early failures, I mean, my first job was in many ways a failure.
Which is funny because I don't think of it as a failure, but I understand why you do. So.
I got into web development and had the one and only boss I never got along with. That didn't work out, but that was not an entrepreneurship failure. No. But there was, as I became a web developer, initially I just wanted to be a web developer, and then I upped my site to, I don't just want to build any websites. Like I want to build websites that help people grow. I always had that ambition that I wanted to not just like sell widgets or whatever, but I wanted to help people grow, be more effective, learn, etc. And so I eventually became a web developer in the learning space and ed tech, and hit that goal. And then I had another goal of like, well, I realized a lot of people keep doing the same product mistakes over and over again. And also that generally engineers don't really invest in like coaching and helping people be their best. They just want to be like locked in a closet by themselves with their computer. And that's like the ideal engineer workspace. And so I wanted to become a manager. And then I just realized like engineering managers don't get hired to, they don't get hired to coach people. They get hired to be like backstops. They're supposed to know, all areas of the stack so they can jump in and code if one of their, if they lose a team member or something, which is a pretty big waste of a manager. Yeah. But managing is generally something that a lot of people don't do very well. And I just realized like that my career that I was in and my goals just fundamentally didn't align. I could be a great manager, but that's not what I would be getting paid for. And it would always feel like I was like working a second job on top of my first one to be competitive as an engineering leader. And then actually do all the things that a good manager should actually do in terms of like coaching, fixing team processes, building culture, etc. And
you're very much an optimizer. And so working for a company that wasn't also optimizing, right, that was satisfying in a lot of ways.
Or satisfying on what mattered to me, right?
Exactly, right? So it was a mismatch of values, a mismatch of, I guess the things that you saw were important. And so from my perspective, as far as kind of what that failure looked like was more just every day was hard. That idea of going to work and having to deal with these people who were not putting in their all like you were, or who were putting their energies towards something else that didn't match your idea of that management position.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, like not working.
Well, or rare cases, but
Rare,
that
yes.
did happen regularly at every job, which, you know, drives you nuts if you're trying to do your best. But the other thing, I mean, that really drove me nuts in general in that job is that, like most companies I worked for that made money, they would roll out this big product plan that, like, this is what we're going to do for the year we're going to focus on. And at least 6 to 9 months of the year would be multiple teams developing towards that target. And they just hadn't done the testing.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to release it early to do the testing to validate that it worked at all in the first place. And so they would release it as a flop. And that was like one of the things that just drove me nuts. And I could raise that red flag and people would be like, no, this is a special case. It's going to succeed this time. And then we'd hit that, release it, and it would like slowly lose money or like, you know, be indifferent, except for it had huge operational costs. Like it made some money, but not enough. Yeah. And then afterwards it'd be like, yeah, you were right. So what are we doing? New big project. And that just drove me nuts, right? And people, and so, you know, engineers just want to work on stuff.
It's true. And the idea of doing something is better than like, let's focus on doing little bits at a time to figure out how to move this forward in a way that will be sustainable. Right. I remember there was a book I read, I don't remember which one it was because I read way too many, but it was talking about how in the workspace, one of the most demotivating things, doesn't matter how much money you're making, doesn't matter, you know, how important of a project it is, if you are working on something that then ends up not being used, right? That wasted effort can be so demoralizing to people that is one of the leading factors of people wanting to leave that job, even if they made a great salary. And not everybody is like that, but it can be a huge, you know, contributor to stress. And
the engineering leadership knew that, actually.
And
the metric for it was how often you're releasing. And I'm like, it doesn't matter, because if you're split testing everything you're releasing and it all gets thrown away anyway, it's like you can release it and it still gets thrown away and not used. So, you know, the actual metric would have been MVP best practices, which everybody knows the word in Silicon Valley, but very few companies that are actually making money and are profitable actually stick to that, because humans don't work that way.
Yeah. If you don't have to, it's hard.
So, but bring that back to failure. So like the reason I became an entrepreneur is because at some point, my career just didn't match my goals, couldn't match my goals, and it didn't work the way I thought it would. And particularly then COVID hit and I realized like, I'm gonna, you know, not make any career progression, you know, right now, just because of the way things were freezing down. And so, you know, that failure, what I learned from that failure is like, well, instead of being frustrated at the industry for not valuing the things that I value, not valuing coaching, not valuing MVP, why don't I find people who do value that and help them do it? Yeah.
And it's been interesting to see the change in you, because I remember the 3 major companies that you worked for during our marriage, I guess. In particular, a couple of them, but you would come home from work and it was just like spewing all of the, oh my gosh, this day was so gonna go, to the point where I had to say, okay, I need a little bit of positivity here, because I take on kind of those feelings. It was hard for me. And it was hard for me to see you with all of that frustration. And now I see there's still frustration, but I also see the good, and I see how you're able to grow and say, okay, well, let's see. Let's try this thing and let's try that thing. And you have the autonomy to do that. So even though there are still frustrating things, you are so much more, you seem much more satisfied.
I can pivot and learn when I hit a roadblock rather than just like keep doing the same thing that's not working, which is very satisfying. But is very difficult in its own way, because in other terms, I fail a lot more just because I'm trying out so many different things that don't work out. But
you seem happier.
But your turn, give us a failure.
Okay. Oh, I have so many. I have so many failures. All right. So let me think which one to do first. Okay. I'll go back a ways for one that was, I see as a huge failure of something that I really wanted to do, and then just, it didn't work. So we'd had our first child and I was starting to kind of, you know, figure out life, things were good. And I discovered that life coaching was a thing. And I'd always wanted to do something where I could help people work through those mental blocks that they have, because it was something that I'd worked a lot on in my life. and finding ways to help people move forward, and empowerment, and all of those buzzwords that you have in life coaching. And so I found, this really awesome guy to train me. I took his course. I did a lot of research. I started a blog and other things like that. And I very quickly realized that life coaching, especially at the beginning, is like 99% marketing. And I don't like marketing myself. I still am not good at marketing myself. It's a thing that I struggle with. And then, I got pregnant again, and there was a whole bunch of other things. And so that just kind of fell by the wayside. And I look back at that and I'm like, oh my, the money that I put into, the training and getting website stuff set up and starting all of these things and putting out blog posts of like, here's what's going to happen. And then it just stopped. And I'm like, okay, well, looking back on that and then trying to see, well, why did it fail? It wasn't that I wasn't a good life coach. I never really found out if I was a good life coach, other than, I did several free sessions and stuff as I was practicing just to get those hours in. But I found out that what I thought the job was is not what it was. Maybe once you get to be one of those really successful ones, then you have people knocking down your doors trying to work with you. But for so many things, and especially in that entrepreneurial space, you have to do everything. And if that's not what you like doing, then maybe it's not the best pathway for you. And so whenever I look at my failures, I do try to think in terms of, what did I learn? It wasn't a failure, it was a learning experience. Because failure just sounds so bad.
Well, this is very similar to my, career thing. Mm-hmm. I had this vision in my head of what I wanted a manager to be. And I think it would be a good one, it's interesting to me that later on, one of the people I coached who talked about being disengaged from a job said, if I had a manager like you, I'm not sure I would have left that job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
It was hugely validating. So it's like, I wasn't crazy about the opportunity there. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if that's not what everybody else is looking for and hiring for,
yep.
don't sell things to people who don't want to buy it.
Yeah.
And that was the first of many times I learned that lesson.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur.
Well, and even so, I guess if I go even farther back, my very first job out of college, I was working as an account manager at a market research firm. Mm-hmm. And so, it was a lot of spreadsheets, calling clients, making sure that, their projects were running, and doing like minor management of projects. And it was soul sucking. Like, I went into work every day, I did my stuff. And then frequently, unless it was the busy season, we would just kind of like twiddle our thumbs and chat and everything. And that's all I needed to do. I didn't have anything else to do, but I felt like a failure in that because I wasn't doing something. They weren't utilizing, and I didn't feel bad for not doing stuff because there wasn't anything to do. I just felt bad. So, but it's funny because a year later after I started that job, it was 2008 or 2009, one of those. And I got laid off 2 weeks before Christmas, which I still am bitter about that. But it's funny, as much as I hated that job, and I knew I was already planning on going to grad school at that point, but I got laid off. And I was like, no, I don't get laid off. I'm good at my job. I do all of the stuff I'm supposed to do. And they even said when they laid me off, it's not about your performance at all. I'd gotten a great performance review that year, but it was the economy, and it's last in, first out. And I was the most recent hire. And so I had to go. And I understood that, but it still felt like this huge failure of mine, even though it had really not a whole lot to do with me. So it's interesting, those things that you can learn from, and then the other ones that you can still be a little bitter about.
Yep. A question for you about that. So all of that personal life coachy stuff, do you use that when you coach language clients or in your production, like bilingual production work?
And that's one of the things where I like to look back and see everything as a learning experience, because I use it every single day. I use it with our kids. I use it with myself. I use it with my interactions with people at church and other things like that, where anytime you're working with people, understanding how people think and that people have different values, and kind of keying into those things, understanding people's strengths and how you match in with that person, right? Even if you're not specifically life coaching them, you can still use that information. And I still use it for myself all the time. The stuff that I learned in my training really has helped me to kind of reframe my life at different points and figure out, okay, where am I at right now? When I was doing the life coaching, I did this kind of life inventory course that I created that I was going to be doing with other people, helping them figure out, where are you now? What are all the things going on in your life? And how can I help you move forward with that? And even if I haven't really done that with that many clients, I still do it with myself and find it hugely valuable because it gives me some perspective. And so, yeah, with that, I actually do feel like, even though that was more of a personal failure and less to do with me, I actually learned more from it than I did from getting laid off.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me of our couples communication course. Yeah. I mean, there's a through line where I'm an English major. I ended up doing some training in communication at one of my jobs. And when I became a coach, one of the areas I thought was like, oh, I've done all this communications research and training. Should I apply that to couples? And so we did that and we got good feedback on it. But I realized like, oh, I'm glad I'm helping people, but I'd rather work with people who are kind of in a good space and then trying to optimize that to move better than like people who might have acute problems and just realizing like, you know, there was a route. If I really loved that, I could go into kind of like marriage and family counseling, you know, and get certified and do that and work with that. But it just wasn't the direction I wanted to go. Yeah. However, I still work with clients who, if they have like a hang up with like, they have issues in their marriage or just frustrations with their family that are due to communication and that's stopping their work, like they're not productive that week. I'm like, all right, let's troubleshoot this. Let's talk about how we can improve communication so that, you know, your family life and your work life aren't in conflict. And so I think, you know, in some sense that didn't work out like I wanted to. It didn't turn into a lucrative career that I wanted to do. But at the same time, like the real failure would have been not trying that and then, you know, not having that experience, not knowing that that's not for me and not developing those skills that I could use later. So I think, you know, probably the biggest failure is just not trying those things where you're like, what if? Yeah. And you keep having them in your head. You keep not giving what you're doing in front of you 100% because you're always thinking, what if I didn't, you know, what if I had done this thing rather than that? And so that kind of keeps you locked in a lower performance way. And it's better to try those things and fail or realize they're not what you want to do and then be able to move on with 100% rather than like being stuck at 80 or 90% because you have this what if in your head.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, there are going to be things that you try that, so I'm thinking about Japan right now. Yep. So after we'd had both of our kids, I was in a space where motherhood was hard. Motherhood was not what I thought it would be. I kind of look back at that and think of, you know, not having kids as a failure, but myself as a failure as a young mom, because it was just not what I expected and much harder. And so one of the things that we decided to do was there was this school in Japan that had wanted me to work. I'd helped kind of create the curriculum for it. And there was an opportunity for me to go out and work there. And we talked about it and figured it was a good time. And we were thinking maybe 3 to 5 years, it was going to be a thing. And I was so excited about this opportunity that I didn't really think about it too much. I was like, yes, let's just do it. I just want to do this. I need to do this.
I was encouraging.
You were incredibly supportive, and we did everything that we needed to get ready. We got rid of all of our stuff. We had like a closet's worth of stuff that we kept at your parents' place, and then we had 8 boxes that we put onto the airplane, and then a couple of bags, and that was all we owned in the world at the time. Moved over to Japan, and it was different than we had expected. I, for one, didn't care because I was in Japan. Japan is my happy place. I love it so much. And I was thriving at work. I was finally in a place where I knew what was expected of me and I could do it. It was hard. It was so hard.
So you were hired to train the teachers, but the principal quit. So you trained the teachers and became principal with no additional increase in compensation.
Or you know, there wasn't a whole lot of support. It was me out there, and I probably could have asked for more help, but I'm not good at asking for help. That's not a skill that I had at the time and still am not great with. But at the same time, it was a project, and it was a fun project for me to be able to work with these students, helping them towards American universities. And
also the caretakers quit as well.
Oh yeah.
Which, you know, I think they did that after the brunt of the snowy season, because it was like blizzarding or on top of a mountain, and you guys had to dig yourself into the school for an hour before starting.
Quite literally.
But like, they're like, no more, we can't take this. And so one of them, so it was like a caretaker couple, one of them was providing meals, and you had to figure out on the fly how to replace that, and you replace that with the students cooking the meals.
I know, it was so great, because so we ate lunches and dinners at the school, and originally it was this caretaker couple that was doing all of the cooking. They might have the students help a little bit with like chopping of things, but for the most part, they did, you know, cleaning and snow plowing and other type of maintenance. And then they were gone, and it was me and another teacher and the students. And then we got another teacher coming out in the spring. And then eventually over the summer, we got interns. But for a while, it was just the two of us and then the three of us. And
so you're performing 2 jobs and backstopping a 3rd.
Yes, with 2 kids, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old.
And basically just a living stipend, no actual salary.
Yeah,
for 3 jobs.
Which, and I still say I love this, and it sounds crazy, and I get it, but I was in my element because I thought, okay, what can I do? Well, the students have time. Students can cook. Students can make decisions. These are important things for them to learn anyway, because we're preparing them for university. And so I was able to go back to some of my life coaching stuff and think, what are they going to need here? And they're going to need these types of skills, and this is our budget. I'm just going to hand that to them. You have to have at least, you know, 2 vegetables that are not onions, because for some reason, like, onions were a vegetable. I don't know. And what pancakes do not constitute dinner. But other than that, you know, I gave it all to them, and they ran with it, and it was fantastic. We did food orders, and it was really great. But it was, you know, little things like that, and everyone was praising me, saying, Meg, you're so amazing. We love you. We need you so much. We don't know what we would do without you. So I was getting lots of positive feedback. But at the same time, it was so hard on you.
Well, and I think the challenge there is, like, as an entrepreneur, you know, you're running the school. You didn't own the business, but you're running the school. So you're kind of in charge of the business.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's the do what you love. Just do what you love. Just follow your passion.
Yeah.
And strangely, people don't pay you for that because they see they don't have to. You're happy following your passion. So they just take whatever you can give and keep taking and taking and taking.
Well, and for me, our housing was paid for. We had food. I didn't have to cook or hardly clean at all. Like, for me, that was living the dream. I you know, I'm not
but we weren't putting anything into our savings.
And that's one of the biggest things is I wasn't thinking future, whatever. I was so in the moment of enjoying what I was doing at this time. And I'm so grateful for you for having that perspective that I didn't have at the time. To kind of, you know, wrap things up a little bit with this, we ended up coming home after like a year and 4 or 5 months. And when we came back, I broke because I saw this wonderful thing that I loved so much. And I wasn't resentful to you at all, because I understood how hard it was for you. I was more just sad that I wasn't able to make it work, that all of this stuff that I loved doing, it didn't work for you. And I loved you and the kids way more than I loved Japan. And so it was worth it coming back for me. But it was still a devastating failure and loss that I couldn't marry those 2 things together.
Well, and the kickers for me, it was hard. I didn't speak, you know, Japanese super well. And because I was taking care of little kids most of the day.
Out in the middle of nowhere.
Out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have a lot of time to practice it. I still remember trying to practice it at a festival. And then an old man's like, your kid's gonna like put his hand in the fire. And then I'm like, fine, I give up. I'm not gonna talk Japanese. I'm just gonna watch the kids.
Yeah.
So I did that for most of the day. But, you know, I found ways to make it work. We were at a for a while we lived in this like condominium, and they had the Japanese public baths, but there weren't a lot of people there in the off season, so I could have the entire public baths to myself, which was awesome. You know, I ran Dungeons and Dragons or a role playing game for teachers at the school and just like geeked out, and so I found ways to make it work. But ultimately, like the kickers for me were like it just wasn't financially viable long term, and plus we didn't really have a good solution for getting our kids socialization. Because it was so remote, and because our kids were young, and the daycare didn't have any extra space, and you know where we lived, and so it was really hard.
It was.
And so like those two long term were the things that it's like, all right, I don't see this working for me. And that's kind of I think that's the corner you can paint yourself in if you're following your passion. But to a certain extent, I was doing a very similar thing. I had a few hours in the afternoon where, you know, the kids could run amok at school, where I could try and start my own company. It was my first time working for myself. I wanted to build an app like a lot of engineers. And like a lot of engineers, I did what I was comfortable with, but not what you need to do to start a business. And so I didn't, you know, research, niche down, do market research. I built something cool that had features I felt like the future of note-taking would need. And I see some of those features now creeping into products.
Isn't
and
it
so
crazy?
I was right about like that this is a technological thing that needs to exist, but what I didn't know is who to give it to. And so later on, you know, I tested with a few people who said they hated it. And I just didn't know. I still actually use it to this day because it's helpful for me. But in contrast, like I created this really flexible, really powerful, smart note-taking system. And, you know, the product that has now successfully adopted some of those features was one that wasn't just like, here, I'm a general note-taking app. It was very specifically project management software that's supposed to be easier than existing tools, like more user-friendly than existing tools. And it was focused very narrowly at first on the project management use case. And then as they expanded out, they started bringing in some of these features that I'd created in my own note-taking app. So like most notably, the idea that you can have a collection of documents and you can view it in different ways, like a timetable, or you know, a list of notes, or even a word cloud. And I'm like, that was something that was in mine. And so the that view of like your data, like instead of separately inputting data into all these different programs, just have like one stack of data that can be displayed in different ways. That idea was like, that was visionary and it was fun to work on, but I hadn't thought of the business sense. I didn't do the marketing. I didn't do the, you know, the niche research, any of those things. I was just doing what I was passionate for. And again, like, I'm not saying avoid your passion, but your passion will most likely cause you to skip the basics. Like making sure you have a way to make money. And, you know, knowing who our target audience is, testing your products with them to make sure they actually like your product, etc. And so that is like definitely the most entrepreneurial, instructive, like, all right, never again. And that's why when I left my job later, I went back to web development after that for a little while. And, you know, after I left again, I focused on services rather than building products and helping other people do product development, because I knew if I started doing product development, I would skip all that difficult phase of like the market research, the niching down. And so there's a lot of failures as I tried to do that and learn to do that. But like overall, doing that has been much more successful for me because I'm growing a lot more than I did in that period where I did what was comfortable and just coded something cool.
And it's, I love that. Just seeing all of the different ways that people can fail, right? But also finding that there are lessons to be learned, because you learned so much from that. I mean, we both learned as a couple a lot from that Japanese experience. I learned a lot as a person. But really that idea of, you know, do what you love, you know, people say that, but it's, I don't know, there's so much more to doing what you love than just the part that you love about it, if that makes sense. That in order to have, you know, kind of this product that actually works, or a service that works, or something, that there's so many more aspects to it. And if this is the thing that you love, and you don't love all of this other stuff that comes along with it, then maybe that might not be the best path for you. Or maybe you can learn to do those other things, but not being afraid of, you know, oh gosh, the failure, because we did try Japan. It was hard. I was really sad when we came back, and you know, we learned a lot from it, and we've moved forward, and I'm able to put that on my resume as a thing that gives me some clout in the stuff that I'm doing now. That the lessons that we learned from that failure and some of the other ones we've talked about have brought us closer as a couple, as well as, you know, helped us in other aspects of our businesses that we've continued on.
Yeah.
So,
well, and so, yeah, do what you love, but like as a human being, you need to pay the bills. And so the real thing that whatever it is for you will engage you at least a good chunk of the time in the thing you love while also paying the bills. And for some people that might be like having a day job and then pursuing, you know, building a business or their dream, you know, outside of that. And that works if you find a job that you can do well and also like leave it home. And I think one of the things that's difficult for us is to do like a job halfway. And so like that's harder. And so it's much easier for us to find, you know, have to look at the Venn diagram of things we love and things that pay and, you know, play in the middle there. And if you don't intentionally do that, like, I think it's easy to fall into the misapprehension that if you love a thing, the opportunity to make money will present itself because there are people who are hugely successful and that's how they portray their story. But I think they're also really rare because they're relying entirely on serendipity to make money and fall into success. Versus if you have some kind of business criteria, like I have to love this and this needs to make enough money for me, then you will act in a different manner in such a way that you can find, you'll be trying out more opportunities that are actually capable of making money and also might be interesting. So I think that is probably the biggest lesson for, I think, a lot of people who are considering starting a business is like, don't just do what you love. Make sure there's an audience of people who actually pay you for it.
And it's okay to fail and it's okay to do all of those things, as long as you have kind of a healthy understanding, that perspective again, that don't quit your day job, you know, kind of a thing. If you do already have some seed money, go for it, you know, try something big. But the idea of trying small things, right? I mean, your easier habits, like do little bits and work towards it, because the big gestures often end in the big failures. And that can be hard. It can be incredibly, you know, growth inspiring and very, very hard. And so by doing little bits at a time, you're able to deal with little failures as well. And I think that's one of the big lessons I've learned from all of this. And
I was doing those little lessons somewhat as a coach. I did find that since we had some money saved up from coding, that being able to focus on coaching and growing in that has allowed me to grow faster. But it's I think it's a combination of doing some of that experimenting backstop and then trying to see if you're ready to expand, which always takes longer than you think. I think even the people who do it relatively quickly, usually it's at least a year and a half full time before their business takes off, and in many cases longer. So I think that's a lesson. Like, don't just follow your passion. Do the basic work, the niche, and make sure that someone's going to want to pay for it. And can I bring up one of your failures?
I'm thinking we actually need a whole other video for like the last 4 years of my failures.
Well, I just want to pick up one that I think dovetails with these ones.
I have so many.
Well, so Meg found a community of Japanese entrepreneurs and was doing free lessons for them every weekday for half an hour, and then launched a paid, we tried to launch a paid community for them, and no one converted. And so that was one of the things where, again, and I think that's one of the problems. If you lead with your passion and don't really work the business sense, your passion will tell you to do a lot of stuff for people for free, and they'll just say yes, but they might not actually end up being your clients. There's no amount of free work that will make someone buy from you if they're not a buyer. And so one of those things in terms of the basics, besides just doing, niche, is a niche of people that could have benefited.
And I don't
greatly.
think it's necessarily like completely closed and done. I mean,
Right.
I still have, consistent.
I think there's like one client that you had, like personal client. No one joined that community.
I've had
right?
a couple of. I've had a couple of personal clients from that group, which has been
right.
at least 3, which has been nice. But it's also finding out where the matchups are, right,
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out who these people are and what they need versus what they think they need.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I have so many ideas of how I can help them, but that might not be the ways that they want to be helped. And so, again, honestly, I really do think we should do a whole other video about like the last 4 years of all of the things that I've tried that, haven't panned out the way that we had thought. But the biggest lesson from there is, we think that we have to give so much value before receiving anything, which, yes, I mean, giving value is a great way to get noticed. But if you don't have a way to then convert that into revenue, it's not sustainable. And finding a way to be sustainable is paramount, especially if you don't want your body breaking.
Yeah. There was a lot of stress and strain on you from doing that. But I think the learning from that as a strategy is like, there's no reason why that shouldn't have been a niche, and and you have found customers, so it's not it's not a niche. Yeah. But at the same time, the amount of investment you were putting into something that didn't pay off in that way was huge. And so I think as an entrepreneur, it's not only make sure there's a business plan, do the market research, find the niche, but just generally as a strategy, give a little value to a lot of people. Like, be generous giving some value to a lot of people. So you should be giving value. You shouldn't be hoarding everything. That's how you get attention in today's internet age, where a lot of people are giving away stuff for free. You have to give value away for free, but you have to be careful. You have to give a little bit of value away to a lot of people. And like, one of the ways that you were doing that, giving value to these people, was an in-person unrecorded lesson that like did not give back anywhere else. Whereas like you could have been capturing, like recording those lessons for like a podcast or YouTube or something and giving that away as free value to a lot more people. Yeah. But instead you're giving a ton of in-person, non-scalable value that required a lot of sweat to a very small group of people. Yeah. And so the goal is actually, you want to flip that around and you want to be giving like a little value or a lot of scalable value to other people. So like, if you had done that and recorded that and that became like a YouTube series or a podcast or something that then a lot of people could benefit from and would have a bigger impact, like, actually that might not be so bad. Yeah. But yeah, you want to scale down the level of effort you're putting into a small group of people. And then you want to know what the signs are that someone's really engaging, like they might become a client or whatnot. And then you want to put a lot of, you may need to, before you sell them as a client, you may need to put extra value into those people, but it's kind of the 80-20 rule, right? You want to make sure that you're putting 80% of your effort to the 20% of people who are actually going to become clients, rather than 80%, of your effort towards the 80% of the people who like free stuff but don't want to buy. Yeah.
Well, and I will say too, it goes back to the, do what you love kind of thing. I had a blast, and I still have a blast with these people. I love these people so much. And so I, as far as a business strategy, not a great business strategy, but as far as like life satisfaction, so much. And so, but it's finding that balance, right? Finding, okay, if you need to make money doing something, you need to figure out how to make money doing that thing. You can't just do it because you love it, which is sad and hard.
Life is horrible.
Life is horrible.
Life is pain, Your Highness.
Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. Yeah. But it is, it's one of those things. And again, it's a great learning experience. And I do still have all of the material that I put together for that. So hopefully I can turn that into something once I'm feeling better. Yeah. And so that's kind of what a possible next venture is for me. So well, we shall see. We shall see where things go.
Try and recoup that effort. Like, learn from what you can when you have a failure. That's the other thing, is just, all right, try things out. It's much better than not having tried anything and having done nothing with that year.
Exactly. And I look back, what else would I have been doing? Probably editing college application essays, which, as much as I love helping people with college applications, just the editing of the essays is a little bit soul-sucking.
Right. And so you've done that for a while. You grew past that. We were talking earlier about how you had done a lot of like school tutoring, but it was getting repetitive. So you've grown past that. And so you tried something new that stretched you, learn those lessons, move on. The challenging thing about being an entrepreneur is there's a lot of those lessons to learn.
Yeah. And it's kind of what you were talking about in when things are extra hard, you grow faster, which is great. And it's hard. So, those growing pains, if you grow slowly, right, don't hurt as much. If you grow quickly, right, you get stretch marks. And so, but also then you have all of that growth to look back on, and you're a more capable person. So,
yeah. So if you have had failures of your own and you learned lessons from them, I'd love to hear those lessons down in the comments. Of course, always like and subscribe if you want more of this content. And until next week, make big changes one small habit at a time.